All right, let's go ahead and get started. Want to welcome everybody. And in celebration of the social justice legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., thank you all for joining the deans, Dean of the Faculty, David Douglas, and me, Paul Benyon, the Dean of Students, for this forum on homelessness in the Treasure Valley. Last night, we heard from J. Dallas Gudgel, a First Nation environmental and human rights advocate, who contends the moral arc of the universe is just, but only with our help. This morning, we had a group take part in a service trip to Farmway Village, a housing development in Caldwell that provides homes for seasonal farm workers as well as low-income families. And earlier today, members of our college community took part in a poverty simulation. Issues related to employment, poverty, and housing inform much of MLK's efforts. And as Karen Haycox, Chief Executive Officer of Habitat for Humanity, stated, this MLK Jr. Day, a national day of service, we remember the legacy set forth by Dr. King and renew our commitment to make housing more inclusionary and to ensure that all people can have access to the benefits of a safe, decent, and affordable place to live. We are fortunate today to be joined by rock star panelists who are embedded in the everyday work to eradicate homelessness in our community. After being introduced, they will each share from their unique qualified perspective the most salient aspects of this issue. My colleague, Dean Douglas, will then moderate a panel audience discussion on the many socioeconomic factors associated with homelessness. Our hope with this and with all of our Dean's Forums is that everyone here, in the spirit of the liberal arts, leaves with a more well-rounded and nuanced understanding of the issue. And today, in the spirit of Martin Luther King, that you'll also consider translating this new awareness into some meaningful action. So let me introduce our panelists. Sean Blackwell, on the end, has joined our very own Professor Blackwell, joined the College of Idaho in fall of 2016 as a sociology and criminal justice instructor. Sean previously worked as a felony probation parole officer and as a community-based mental health provider. Sean holds a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Texas Christian University, a Master's of Science in Sociology of Crime, Control, and Globalization from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and is completing a PhD in Criminology from the University of Leicester in the UK. Sean is married to a Yote and has a 16-year-old stepdaughter, a 20-month-old son, and my goodness, twins due this June. In his spare time, Sean enjoys family activities, playing guitar and rock climbing. Closest to me is Rabe, is the executive director of the Jesse Tree, a nonprofit prevention, eviction, and homelessness for low-income families in the Treasure Valley. Prior to joining Jesse Tree, Ali was staff attorney at Homebase, headquartered in San Francisco, where she supported local governments and service providers in their efforts to end homelessness. In 2012, Ali received the Boren Fellowship, through which she supported indigenous communities in rural Cambodia fighting to keep their land. She continued the same work in Sierra Leone. Ali has spent some years working for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services as an adjudicator, processing refugees from all over the world. Ali is an Idaho native and holds a BA from the College of Idaho, and a JD from William Mary School of Law. Ali is also a member of the college's Board of Trustees. Yes. Natalie Sandoval received her master's in social work from the University of Missouri, Columbia. Her social work practice is primarily centered on individuals and families who are homeless and struggling with chronic addiction, chronic mental illness, HIV/AIDS, physical differences, and/or developmental differences. In January of 2019, Natalie began working for the Nampa School District as the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Liaison. Natalie brings to Nampa the same collaborative spirit and practice strategies that she implemented in Missouri. Her experiences engaging in micro-practice, grant writing, program development, and community organizing have taught her that to be successful, you must be able to deal with a wide range of concerns, programs, and people. As a child of a father who immigrated from Mexico and a mother from the Boot Hill of Missouri, Natalie is deeply passionate about diversity and social justice issues. She strives to create a community that is collaborative and truly open to serving some of its most vulnerable. And lastly, of course, but thank you. Wyatt Schroeder serves as the Director of Community Partnership for the City of Boise, working to stand up and sustain public-private collaborations that improve the health, housing stability, and inclusion of our city's most vulnerable populations. The son of a mushroom farmer, Wyatt was born near Philadelphia, imbuing him with a love of urban and rural life. After earning Eagle Scout in Boy Scouts, Wyatt committed to a life of service as vocation. He spent a few political campaign cycles bouncing around the East Coast before discovering his life's work through AmeriCorps, ending homelessness. He has spent the last 10 years working to end homelessness in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Boise through organizations like Doorways for Women and Families, Project Home, and Catch. He believes to his core that we all deserve safe and stable homes. Wyatt. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Dean Douglas, and our panelists to provide their opening comments.
Hi, folks. I fancy that Paul and I look almost so much alike you can't tell us apart, but every time I follow him on a podium, I have to draw down the mic about 4 inches. I am well above the national average in terms of height. I'd just like to be clear to everybody who might doubt that. I couldn't be happier to add my welcome to that of Paul, and also to say welcome to those who are attending for the first time one of the Dean's Fora. For those unfamiliar, we hope to see more of you in the future. We very deliberately select topics that might be considered to represent wicked problems in the world, and I mean that intentionally in two capacities. One, in the sense that they produce real harm to the environment, to humanity, to our communities, but in another sense, they're also wicked in the Bostonian idiom, that is to say, they don't brook simple solutions. There is no clear path to solving them, and that's why we want to attend them in this context. To give you a sense of the kind of problems that we've attended, even in the last cycle or so, we've looked at immigration and identity, gun rights and responsibilities, media in the post-truth age, post-Christchurch, post-Pittsburgh, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and white nationalism. And in each case, as in this one, we don't want to tell you what to think, we want to tell you what to think about. We don't want to describe the position where you should end up. We want to describe for you the place that you should start out. And with that in mind, it's my enviable task to allow the panelists to begin their statements with a brief reminder. This is not supposed to be a series of speeches, even by the deans. This is supposed to be engagement with the audience. And so this forum is explicitly dedicated to you. We would like from the very beginning, I hope even before my remarks, you to start thinking about your point of entry into this thinking, this discussion, this contemporary problem. And so as the panelists are speaking, please consider how you might want to ask a question or offer an observation of your own. And to the panelists, they have already been warned. We do our best to press down on long speeches. And since 3 of the 4 of them are not faculty members, that'll be less difficult than usual. They're trying to figure out who I'm referring to there. I'll just leave them a moment. And in a time-honored fashion, I will take my seat next to Dean Binion as they begin speaking. When they reach 5 minutes, I will stand right there by that chair. As they approach 7 minutes, which is the hard stop limit, I will slowly encroach upon their visual and perceptual space until they feel the need to bring their remarks to a halt. And then as soon as they're done, and we'll simply move right across the panel, as soon as they're done, we'll turn quickly to the questions, engagement from you, the audience members, and we won't ask every panelist to respond to every question, but rather let them jump in where they feel their expertise and experience is most relevant. So without further ado, are you working out an order, or are we going? They've already taken over. I would have started with Ali, but they may start anywhere they wish. And it looks like Sean.
I guess I'm going first.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here. I see a lot of students I've had and currently have, so thanks for coming. Also to my colleagues. Well, I think the main reason I'm here is because I was homeless as a child. My dad and I left Massachusetts when I was about 5 years old, and we took a series of Greyhound buses across the American West. We went through Chicago, St. Louis, Oklahoma, Arizona, and Las Vegas on our way to Boise, and my students have heard this story a million times. The true story is my grandfather, a devout Catholic, closed his eyes in an Arizona motel where we were staying and prayed for God to send us where we should go, and his finger landed on Boise, and that is how I'm here today. That's where we went. So after that, my grandfather actually went to California to sober up for what would be the last time. Good job, Grandpa. And my grandmother ended up living on the streets and spending some time with the YWCA. While she was homeless in her own way, my father and I were staying in one of the shelters in Boise for a period of time. And one of the great ironies of life is the person who probably helped my grandmother the most get off the streets is now the only woman on death row in Idaho, but that's a story for another forum. Anyway, my dad and I, thanks to some of that help, we ended up living together, moving in with my grandmother, lived with her for many years, and that was our final exit from homelessness. So as many folks will tell you, that there are many different types of homelessness. There's motel homeless, there's car homeless, there's shelter homeless, street homeless, tent homeless, so on and so on and so on. And those experiences, even though I was very young and don't remember much of it, to be honest, I do remember some of it. I still get excited when I see a dumpster now to go dumpster diving. That definitely stuck with me. And it kind of set me up to end up where I am today. Because after we got off the street, most of my family were involved in crime in one way or another. I slowly developed a passion for criminology and ended up working in the community, as you heard, both with kids with mental health diagnoses and as a felony probation parole officer. So homelessness had kind of faded to the background for me until, as a felony PO, I was actually able to work with many of these guys coming out of prison on parole and folks being sentenced to probation. And the most difficult population was the guys coming out on parole. Most of the folks I worked with were men. So what I was able to see there was that homelessness was a serious, serious problem, and in ways we may not even think about because, and I know Jesse Tree does some work around this, many of these folks had pretty significant instability. They were transient in ways that would set them up to be at great risk of ending up on the street. What we would do in the Department of Correction, I'm not sure what the policy is now, it's probably not supposed to be out there, but we would give our guys maybe a month, sometimes 2, every once in a while 3 months of what's called transitional funding to put them in a halfway house. Now you may think, oh, that's great, you know, they get some free housing for a while. Well, some of them were great. Some of my guys would end up in some historic North End home and it'd be a cool reintegrative experience for them. But many of them ended up with these private housing providers who would do things like staple bed sheets to the ceiling to create dividers. They would stuff grown men, 30, 40, 50-year-old men, 5 or 6 deep into a room, and we're talking like a small child's bedroom size, to live together and try to figure out their sobriety, their job, security, all that kind of stuff. And as you can imagine, especially my college people in the room who have roommates, it's difficult to live with someone else in such a small space, right? So imagine some of those difficulties you have as students, but you also have children who need child support, you're fighting an addiction, somebody in your house is maybe dealing drugs, and you have to try to fight to resist that urge to use drugs. You're dealing with a chronic, serious, persistent mental illness is what we call it, an SPMI, and maybe you're having trouble managing your symptoms. You have a compounding array of factors working against you. And what would happen to quite a few of my guys is they would end up homeless. They couldn't quite make it because the deck was stacked against them. And I feel like, I may be wrong, of course, I'm often wrong, but I feel like convicted felons are not a population that we talk about a lot when we talk about homelessness. We talk about kind of the stereotypical, Vietnam vets with mental illness, homeless families like I was, but convicted felons are not a popular population. They're not folks that have tended to inspire empathy until really very recently with the opioid crisis. We've seen an uptick in that. And one subpopulation is, of course, sex offenders. Sex offenders and other convicted felons have tremendous difficulty accessing housing in Boise. I don't know if IDOC will tell you this. Well, they probably will now. It is an actual crisis, even among the Department of Correction. They are scrambling to figure out, how can we house these people? How can we get these folks into stable, supportive housing that is going to facilitate their, what we call, desistance process, and help them just become more healthier people. Not only just not commit crime, but actually learn how to deal with their trauma, their triggers. And in the case of sex offenders, not recidivate. You may hate sex offenders, you may think they're disgusting people, and some of them, of course, have done really disgusting things, but the reality is a sex offender who is housed in a stable environment is much less of a danger to the community. So even the populations that inspire the least of our empathy are folks who are in pretty dire need of our help. And I can't wait to see what's going on. I feel like I'm running out of time, David, right? Yes? I mean, he's my boss, so I better shut up. So I can't wait to see what solutions we continue to come up with. I'm really encouraged by the work that these folks have done. The stats I've read are that homelessness is down a little bit in Boise over the past year or two, so great work, you three. Good job. I just can't wait to see what's going to come to continue to help convicted felons get their lives together as well. All right, I'll shut up. Thanks for your time.
It's funny, if any of my friends were here, they'd be frightened that I was just handed a microphone. So I will try to keep it short for sure. But yeah, my name is Natalie Sandoval, and I am the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Liaison for the Nampa School District. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute and share with you what we're seeing from the work that I do. But I will just share with you that I grew up in Missouri, primarily did a lot of my social work practice in a community called Cape Girardeau, Missouri. It's a community of about 35,000 people. And if you would have told me at the time I graduated with my bachelor's in social work that I was going to be spending my life working with individuals that struggle with housing, I would have said no. Because like so many people, especially in rural communities, we don't believe homelessness exists because we don't see it, because it doesn't look like what we see on television, because we don't see people out on the street all the time. And typically what we were seeing is a lot of times we were seeing people moving from St. Louis to Memphis back and forth, and so they were folks that weren't part of our community, and so therefore homelessness was an urban issue and not one in a rural community. I am so thankful that I was given the privilege to work for a not-for-profit organization that had just received a grant, permanent supportive housing, through HUD, and I started doing case management with individuals and families that were on the street and also impacted by some sort of significant difference, whether that would be HIV, chronic addiction, chronic mental health. Typically, it was all the above. And it was an incredible privilege, and one that I will just start off by saying has changed my life and my life course. And the folks that I worked with have just taught me so much more about humanity than I ever thought I could know. So I just share that with you as we start kind of to dialogue about this too. So my job at the Nampa School District as the McKinney-Vento Homeless Liaison, McKinney-Vento is a policy that was passed in the late 80s under Reagan. Basically what the bulk of my job is to reduce educational barriers for families and students that are in a housing transition or homeless. To try not to use that term so much. But what that means is, I'll tell you what it means to reduce barriers, but I'll also tell you what the students that we work with, how they meet the criteria for homeless. So we work with families that are staying in their car, staying in an RV that may not be connected to any sort of utilities. Maybe they're staying at a hotel, maybe they're bouncing from place to place, or maybe they're at a shelter. We also do work with individuals and families that are what we call doubled up. So maybe they're staying with another family or friend for a short period of time. I like to digress on that just for a second because a lot of times people think, well, how is that homeless? They have a roof over their head. I think what's important to understand is the bartering that's going on for someone to stay where they're staying can sometimes be stuff we don't like to talk about, for sure. And so we have to understand that just because somebody is in a home with a roof over their head does not mean trauma isn't happening there. So that's who we serve under that homeless definition under McKinney-Vento. How we reduce educational barriers. So if you can empathize and you are a family living in a car, and so of course we know there's NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and so if you're living in your car and all your family stuff is in there and you're parked out front of somebody's house, I hate to say it, but sometimes the neighborhood is like, can you move along, right? So you have to keep moving from place to place. Long time ago, before McKinney-Vento was passed, that family was being told, oh, now your car is over there, that's at West Middle School, so now you need to move there. So we were having kids move from school to school to school. And we know through research now that all that high mobility, it can take a kid 3 to 6 months to recoup from the education lost during that transition. So that mobility matters in education, right? So that's one thing that the law says. We want to keep kids in the school of origin, the school of where they're attending. So it's our burden as a district to work on transportation to try to work those things out. The other thing that we were seeing is birth certificates, immunization records. Do you think it's easy to hang on to those things if you're bouncing from place to place or staying in your car? You lose those things. I lose paper on a daily basis, and I consider myself rather professional. So if you're a family that is moving from place to place, we want to try to get those things. And so we don't want our schools saying you can't come in because you don't have a birth certificate. And yes, sometimes those things are passed from school to school, but they're not always getting to the schools in a timely fashion. So we want that student sitting in the classroom, not waiting for us to get those things. Then a big part of my job is to work with that family to be able to provide some resources to get those birth certificates so they do have those. So that's just one example of how we reduce the barriers. I'll share with you that we currently have identified over 860 students in the Nampa School District that are meeting that definition of homelessness. We assess new families every day because what we're seeing is families that are working, but it's not enough, right? They have income coming in, but it's just not enough to sustain the housing that we're seeing. We know that our market right now, there's a tremendous amount of demand, and the supply is limited, and so I'm not an economist, but I think we know what happens. We're seeing that struggle. With the students that we identify anybody in the home that's 0 to 21. A big part of our job is certainly wanting to intervene early when a family is in a housing transition. We want children to be in Head Start programs or some different things to hopefully help curb some risk factors. So we see a really young population with who we serve. I know when I was just looking at some of our numbers from last year, the largest percentage of students in a housing transition that we captured last year were in the first grade. So it's a very young population. The social worker in me looks at that from a strengths perspective and says, okay, that's a lot of time that we can create intervention to make change for this family and for this student's life. We see a very young group of people that are struggling with housing. I don't think that means that at high school or middle school, things are just magically better. I think what happens is at the elementary age level, we're teachers and parents, we're much more involved at that level with kids. And when we get to middle school and high school, I think we kind of back off and start teaching independence. And so we just don't engage as much with older students. So we know those numbers are there, and we need to continue to work harder to capture those students so we can provide services. So I'm seeing that my time is almost up. I could go on and on, but that's just a little bit about what I do. Certainly could share more about what we're seeing with the families that we're serving in the Nampa School District.
You're getting your workout over there, David. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wyatt, and it's great to meet everyone. Quick poll of the crowd. How many folks here, raise your hand if you think that homelessness is one of the top 3 issues in the Treasure Valley? All right, I'd say like 65, 70%. All right, same question, but a little different perspective. If you polled all of your parents and friends, raise your hand if you think all of them would say that homelessness is a top 3 issue in our community. I think I saw one hand, yes. We call that the bystander effect, and I think that is, unfortunately, what has led to a lot of homelessness in the first place, is we know that there is something happening, and it's why you're all selecting to sit here today. But what I think is really important about this happening on Martin Luther King Day is that participation matters. The idea of the issue isn't terribly helpful. Actions in response to the issue is everything. So I went to a liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, Allegheny College, go Gators. You've never heard of it, it's fine. And I would go to any number of conversations like this because that's what you do when you're a educated liberal arts kid. And for me, it was AmeriCorps that really changed that perspective, doing that work in Washington, D.C. And now if someone said, Wyatt, is homelessness something we should probably work on? I'd go, yeah, of course. They go, is that the thing you should spend the rest of your life working on? I would have said no at the time. But doing a year down in Washington, D.C. completely changed my perspective because you heard stories. You heard stories of homeowners who were still living in houses that they hadn't been upstairs in over a decade because they couldn't get up the stairs anymore. You had stories of homeowners who were dying in their own house because of the toxins coming through because they couldn't afford any repairs. Because you try living off of SSDI every single month. And so those stories just really affected me and I think really brought me to this conversation today. But even one person, I think what I've kind of learned is even one person's life and one program, unfortunately, maybe gets all the attention. You know, you're going to read a newspaper article probably sometime this week about one program that's doing an amazing job in the Treasure Valley, and it's true, they are. Or maybe this month you'll read a story about one person who's doing a great thing, and it's true, they are. But there was one time when I was doing street outreach in Philly. I grew up just outside there and was finally working in the city. And you knew we were short on staff whenever they would ask me to do street outreach. I was an administrative worker doing fundraising and community engagement. Going to Rotary was more my thing and talking to them than it was necessarily going the streets. So I didn't have the perspective of our longtime workers. And so there we are, it's 3 a.m., walking through Washington Square, and we're waking people up and giving them a quick survey. And so there's a gentleman, just that classic image that we've seen in Time magazine, and I'm still excited. So I wake him up. I'm saying, sir, good morning. Good morning, my name's Wyatt. Can I chat with you for a minute? And he kind of rolls over, stares at me, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 3 a.m. somehow, and he just goes, yeah? And I go, well, I work for an organization called Project Home. You know, hopefully you've heard of us. We're one of the largest homeless service agencies in the country, and we're actually just called Blocksmere. Have you ever visited us before? And he just kind of realized at that moment who he's talking to, and he looks at me and goes, man, I've been to Project Home more than you have. And every single time I go, all you have are forms, waiting lists, and false promises. I'm good. No thanks. That completely rocked my world. There's a ton happening in the Valley around homelessness, and especially around the work to end homelessness. But the reality is this: there's no one program, there's no one person, there's no one government agency, and there's no one college that can end homelessness alone. The reason that gentleman was feeling that way is because that's how we've built the system that you're all potentially entering in right now. There's a system of care which is fragmented, and there's a system of care that does discriminate still today. There's a system of care that has bias at its root. And unfortunately, if we act solitarily, if we just create one more organization, you know, and all the pride that might come into it, that isn't necessarily the answer. We need to build collaborations to tear down those barriers, the system of care, where that person gets to walk into Project Home immediately or as rapidly as possible gets served. That's some of the work that we've been doing in the Valley. And in Ada County, we have a partnership called Our Path Home, which is trying to do that. And now, even 3 years into that partnership, we still have a long way to go. Because at the root of all homelessness in this work is trauma. And you've already heard it mentioned here, and I think just bears repeating. Timing matters. The longer we wait to house someone, the worse off they are. So if you think about it, I always think one of the easiest ways to think about this is through the eyes of a child. So your College of Idaho is doing a great job to shape your minds and to give you this transformational experience. But the reality is this: the die was already cast on your life. 90% of your brain develops in the first 5 years of life. 90%. So if that develops in too traumatic an experience, what they call adverse childhood experiences, if you have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, I'm seeing some people nod, you lead a completely different life. Your body responds differently. As I say, the body keeps score. So if that's true, and you experience too much trauma, i.e. too much homelessness, your life expectancy goes down by 11 years. before you're 5 years old. You're 466% chance more likely to experience depression in your life. You're 3 times more likely to get an autoimmune disease like lupus. All that happened before you even became 6 years old. So homelessness and this system of care really matters, so that I often still think about that person who's laying on the streets of Philadelphia or in our streets here who says, yeah, I know who your program is. I've been every single one of yours. What can we do to make sure that they are as rapidly served, so the trauma they're experiencing can be reduced and lessened as rapidly as possible?
I'll try my best to keep it short, but I think we have a group of would-be professors up here as well. I went to college here, go Yotes, and grew up in Middleton just down the road, and I kind of ended up in this line of work because it's really personal to me. I grew up in a household of modest means, and I had a really close family member who was in and out of the criminal justice system and homelessness throughout my childhood, and it really affected me and my desires to make a difference in the world, push the arc of change towards justice. And I went to law school to become a public defender. And I think the rest of the panelists all talked about how, housing is complicated. It involves, issues around criminal justice, poverty, mental, physical health, some substance use. It's a really multifaceted problem. When I went on to become a public defender and was talking to people in jails, a lot of times they just wanted to talk to me about their issues around housing. A lot of the people had been evicted, or they were having issues with being displaced in Cambodia where I worked, and housing is everything. And if somebody has an issue with their housing and they're unstable in their housing, if you didn't have a place to go to bed tonight, a place to, a pillow to rest your head on, I encourage you to think about this when you go to bed tonight. If you didn't have that, you probably wouldn't be here right now. You probably wouldn't be able to, do your homework or submit some internship applications later today or whatever your plans are, because all you can think about is housing. And so there's this concept, housing first, that these guys all touched on. Without housing, nothing else matters. You can't think about anything else, and research has really shown that. And without housing, too, your life gets exponentially worse with each passing day. Without a place to sleep, you develop more mental, physical health issues, can develop substance use disorders, and then the experience is incredibly traumatic. When I worked in the Bay Area in homelessness, I saw the difference between, somebody who had been homeless for just, 6 months, they'd been recently evicted, versus somebody who'd been out there for 30 years. And that difference can really be attributed to the experience of homelessness, the fact that they had been living out there for so long. So, and we didn't really talk about cost, fiscal cost, but I encourage you to bring this up to your family members around the dinner table that may not think homelessness is one of the top issues facing our community. The cost in this community, we know it costs $53,000 per year per individual who's homeless, and that's in health, supportive services, first responder costs. Versus we know to prevent homelessness, meaning to prevent an eviction and keep someone in their home when they're about to be evicted, it costs about $900 on average. If they do get evicted and they end up trying to find a new place, it costs $5,000 to $10,000 because there's the cost of moving out, moving back in, finding a temporary place in between, and then all the application fees, all the fees to move out, etc. And once you're evicted, there's a social cost as well, because it's very much like getting wrapped into the criminal justice system. You've got that on your record, and in a market with high demand, how are you supposed to find a new place to live? Landlords can easily turn people with an eviction record away and find an applicant with a more stable housing history. So at Jesse Tree, we prevent eviction. We work with families that are essentially living paycheck to paycheck, and something comes up and they can't pay their rent. So we work with them, we'll pay their rent, support them through the court process, and try to keep them in their homes. So I'll try to keep it short for you, David.
Thank you so much to each of our panelists. This is your opportunity to jump into the conversation as promised, and so our protocol is very simple. With a lot of experience having passed microphones around, the acoustics in this room are actually pretty good, so if you don't mind, if you have a comment or a question, simply wave your hand and we'll see you. Stand, share your comment or question, and if it can't be heard, we'll repeat it through the microphone for anybody in the back of the room or who may have difficulty hearing for whatever reason. And then without further ado, we'll move directly to our panel. Please. Standing up. There we go.
I feel like a lot of people don't have a lot of empathy for homeless people or people transitioning homes. How, in your experience, do you kind of communicate to others to like share empathy and like really give people the knowledge to not just think homeless people are like dangerous or things like that? That's my.
A quick check on comprehension. Did folks in the back of the room hear okay? Anyone not here, wave your hand and I can simply repeat questions as we go. We seem okay. Let's give it a try. Please, panelists.
Can I ask the audience some of the myths or commonalities that you've heard about, people who are homeless, like things that, attributes or personality traits or things that people in your community think about homeless people? Yeah.
Please, ma'am.
We're from Spokane area, and it's a huge drug issue there. It's the opioid crisis.
People think that people living inside are, addicts. Yeah. Lazy, yeah, they don't want to work.
I just remember a couple years ago that near the Interfaith Sanctuary that got a lot of press. I think it probably shaped a lot of people's minds about people that don't have places to stay.
Also in the Spokane area, we have a whole lot of panhandlers who are not actually homeless and are making money at that instead.
So some people that appear homeless are not actually homeless. Okay. I've heard too, people want to be out there. It's a choice. They've got severe mental health issues, so they can't be in housing. They couldn't make it there anyway. I've heard all kinds of things like that. So do you want to talk a little bit about the answer to how to just, because you were deep in it, Catch, but we hear that a lot, and it's not necessarily true. It could really be anyone in this market, especially right now with the cost of housing and so many people that are at risk of being evicted. 80% of the people who contact us and are being evicted because they can't pay their rent is because of some temporary financial crisis. They're the working poor, people living right on the line, and they've had some unanticipated expense come up, whether it's their job, they have a gap in employment, they have had a healthcare crisis with their kid or their spouse, somebody was incarcerated in the family or hospitalized, or their car broke down. All kinds of things like that can happen, and it is a temporary situation. So just telling stories. I think telling those stories is something that I do. Telling the story of the single mom who lost her job and her kid got the flu in the same week, and then she got to the point where she had to pay her rent, she couldn't do it. Telling those stories is really powerful because people relate. In some way or another, they maybe know somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck, or they've had somebody who they've had to support in their family who's in that situation, or maybe they've been in that situation themselves. But just humanizing it, telling those stories, and also sharing our stats.
I think it's such an important question, and an ever-evolving one. One thing for me, and we're at a college, we're constantly talking about language, right? We're constantly talking about which words to use. And for me, in all of our work, we try to never say homeless people for that reason. There are people experiencing homelessness. The situation of homelessness is temporary, and the personhood is not, though. So trying to recognize that personhood, I think, is absolutely huge. And in a lot of our community work, what we try to get is to have people just conceptualize what is home, which sounds like such a basic trite question, but the reality, like if you just start thinking about what is home and just get able to use what words come to mind, safety, family, warmth, comfort, we can hopefully start to break down this barrier around this word deserve. Because I do think we have to make people uncomfortable, and especially on a day like today. Like it's not our job to make sure everyone's living that life of comfort and convenience as much as we're challenging some of their thoughts. And many people, especially in our community, do not think people deserve housing. It's a question that I often ask in my community presentations, and I just ask that for a show of hands, and you'll only get usually 30 to 40% of people raise their hand and say, yes, people do deserve housing. So what's behind that then? Like our American conception of deserve is really complicated. We don't think people deserve housing. They have to earn it. And Ali teed this up, but the idea of earning housing is how we got in this problem in the first place. So homelessness feels like it's been with us forever, but the reality is that people have been experiencing homelessness for as long as we've had civilization, but the idea of a social problem of homelessness is only as new as the 70s. It's not terribly old. Homelessness was not seen as a response system until the McKinney-Vento Act that Natalie teed up. So it's still a relatively new problem that we unfortunately helped birth as civilization. And so I hope that we can turn that and realize that this didn't have to come about in the first place, of how we look at housing. And so if that's the case, then we can dismantle that thought and get people to conceptualize home and realize that everyone does deserve that.
And I'll kind of piggyback off of some of what Wyatt and Ali have said as well, that I think what I see in my social work perspective and the practice that I've had with people on the street is, for me to be empathetic, I have to oftentimes think, what would I be doing? That the decisions I've made, I've seen people make, I can get to a place where I understand why that's a rational choice based on the environment that they're living in. It doesn't mean, and as a social worker, we get sometimes a bad rap for putting Band-Aids on things, right? Well, I think in all my work, all I can share is that I can see why, even though that choice to me seems irrational, for that person at that moment, it is a rational life decision that makes sense. So I don't ever condone a bad behavior, but I can get to a place where I understand why that choice was the choice they made, And I think a lot of times I'll hear people say, why don't they just go to shelter? Well, shelters are full. And matter of fact, in Nampa, we only have 90-day family shelter. It's going to close in March. And then families have to separate. People don't know that, and then it's, why don't they just get a better job? Well, so I think we also have to ask the question, really big question for our society is, my perspective is we are really good at blaming the individual instead of looking at the systemic and structural barriers that have been part of our foundation for a long time. And there's been winners and there's been losers. And we oftentimes love to share the story of the winner.
You got some snaps.
I guess the only thing I'll add to that, because they've covered everything wonderfully, is that those structural barriers are pretty profound for people with felonies. I guess that'll probably end up being my focus today. Idaho has one of the most punitive criminal justice systems in the United States. 71%, as of 2016, I think the numbers are worse. 71% of our prisoners are folks who are guilty of technical violations of their parole, which means they broke the rules. They didn't go out and kill anybody. They used some meth. They used meth a few times, they got caught, and some hard ass decided that they should get arrested. And I worked with those people, and they're not bad human beings, but there's an underlying punitiveness that we see also with people who are justice involved that is part of that intersecting array of difficulty with accessing stable housing, stable drug treatment, because the drug treatment stuff runs out after a few months, stable mental health. All of those barriers they face can be so much more difficult to overcome because of the way laws have been written to exclude those guys. Getting a HUD voucher, a Section 8 voucher, you guys know many folks with felonies, if you've been convicted of drug dealing, if you're a sex offender, you can't get a Section 8 voucher. And by the way, drug dealing, right? We want to think of, Breaking Bad or various media images. Some of the drug dealers I worked with on parole, gosh, one was she was 19 and her boyfriend and her were selling some pills. I mean, we're not talking about some kind of big old operation. They were selling some pills. She went to prison for 3 years, no probation. She went and did 3 years and got out, and now she had to rebuild her life from scratch as a, bad at math, 22, 23-year-old. And I think the only reason she made it is because her dad was rich. She had a wealthy dad. But, short of that, some of the other clients I worked with who were traffickers were folks that were coming out with a deck stacked against them. And indeed, unfortunately, I can think of one person who turned to sex work. That was the means available to her at that time because of the employment discrimination and the housing discrimination that she faced entering the community. By the way, if you're a voter, call your legislator. Ban the box stuff is supposed to be coming up this session, so, poke your legislator, get them to vote yes for it, because everyone know ban the box. So ban the box is legislation designed to ameliorate employment discrimination. Employers can still ask further down the process if you have a felony conviction, but it's supposed to remove the box on the front end to try to give you more of a chance. I believe it's called the Fair Chance Act in Idaho, to give you a chance to actually present yourself to an employer as somebody who's qualified for the job. So if you get a job, well, guess what? Maybe you can get closer to making rent. All of these issues intersect, and that's what you guys have drawn attention to. I guess that's all I got.
It occurred to me at this point to say that's the sort of left-leaning, bleeding heart progressivism we would expect from a professor. But then it occurred to me you may not fully understand the esteem with which I, the dean of the faculty, am held by my faculty, and so I thought better of it. The reason I mention that this moment is to insert a privilege that Dean Binion and I claim rarely but occasionally, which is to ask a question of our own. And from the podium, I would seek a response. So far, it seems as though there is a shared sensibility relative to the importance of this problem, its intractability, the complexity of the problem. And I'm curious if you can point to any divergencies. Do you think, for example, some approaches are better than others? What should be done first? Priorities, expenditures, investments, and I'm not seeking to get you to disagree with each other so much as I am seeking you to complexify, to complicate the problem for us. Help us understand the differences of opinion that may exist, if not on the panel itself, in the world of approaches to this difficulty.
I'm trying to decide how political I should be. Well, I mean, definitely there's a ton of disagreements, and all you have to do is come visit us in Boise and come and sit in my office in City Hall and then go and sit literally anywhere at the state legislature. Housing, unfortunately, we can maybe agree because we're all self-selecting on who's on this panel, the work we've done, and your curiosity to come and sit and listen. But we're one of very few states that doesn't give a single dollar from the state legislature to this issue. And by this issue, I don't just mean homelessness, I mean housing. So if we all think that housing is super important, well, right now we have a Idaho State Trust Fund that was created in the late 90s. It was created just like a lot of states have done, I believe about 40 have done, to say, great, we have to build housing. Housing doesn't just happen. We have to actually build it, and building costs money. Let's create a little trust fund at the state level to incentivize the right kind of housing, the housing that can help people that are lower income, the people that need supportive housing. Well, we put $0 in it, and it's been $0 for now over 20 years. So we have this trust fund, so that's cool. But I don't know if you have a bank account with $0 in it, but it doesn't do much good. So we do see at the local level, I do think we're getting more and more aligned. But unfortunately, right now, if you walked outside of the Treasure Valley, you wouldn't see the same agreement on how we need to really approach this problem. And I do think the problem needs to be looked at from a housing stock and housing inventory standpoint and the services that we're talking about here. So I think that's a huge disagreement on the role of state government, or maybe even the role of government in general, that we do see a ton in Idaho.
So from the service provider's perspective, we know what works to solve homelessness. It's investing in it. I mean, housing stock is definitely a challenge for us as providers. Just especially when someone becomes homeless, finding them a unit and a landlord or property manager that's willing to take them in is hard, and there's not much affordable housing out there. So that's definitely a challenge. But we do know that giving somebody either what we call rapid rehousing, a time-limited housing subsidy if they're homeless, or a permanent supportive housing voucher or a Section 8 voucher works, especially when coupled with quality supportive services from a social worker to get somebody into housing. And we find that, and people really surprise you, especially in the rapid rehousing context. You don't really know how long it's going to take somebody to find stability, but sometimes people find it in just 3 months, and takes them. They just need 3 months of rent, and then they can go off on their own and thrive. We know too, in the prevention context, rental assistance really works to just give somebody a hand up during their greatest time of need, prevent that eviction from getting on their record. We found that over the past 2 years, Jesse Trees helped over 700 people, and over 90% of them are still in their homes. So just giving people money so they can pay for rent, it's a pretty simple solution.
And back to the audience, please, right here with the blue.
For someone who is not an American citizen, what is Section 8?
Question is, what is Section 8 for somebody who may not be familiar with that term?
So Section 8 is one of several sort and type of programs through our federal entity, HUD, Housing and Urban Development. But how Section 8 can be done can be different based on the housing authority. So like the community I came from in Missouri, we actually had no housing authority. So we had vouchers that were coming in from another community that then could be circulated into the regular rental market. So I have a voucher that is given to me from Section 8 that says, because I work a little bit of a job, I'm gonna pay X amount of dollars, and then the government is gonna pay X amount of dollars for me. I'm also told in this voucher that because I'm a family of 3, that I qualify for a 2-bedroom in this price range. So I take this voucher and I go out to the community and I try to find a property owner that's gonna rent to me. There's also Section 8 that's more project-based. So, and that's where the term like projects kind of comes from. It was, okay, that's government housing. That's where people are living, where I may be paying a portion, and then the government is also subsidizing that for me. So does that help a little bit with Section 8? And I'll just share with you, with Section 8, there's lots of stigma around people that receive those vouchers. It's we other them. It's those people. I hear all the time, they tear up my units. They don't, so again, we have to have much larger conversations about those stereotypes and breaking those things down. Because I know in order to circulate those vouchers, we're seeing more and more property owners not take them, because they don't have to. So they can say, I'm not gonna take it. And so now you have a person who's got this piece of paper that could be really helpful, and they're not able to find anything because property owners have too much stigma on those people. So big discussion with that as well, with Section 8 and those sort of housing programs, so.
Let's go all the way up to the top of the auditorium, please.
I'll stand up so you can hear me better. So I know that anti-homeless spikes are becoming more and more increasing in cities, and benches that you cannot sit on or sleep on. Do you think those are useful ways to combat homelessness, or do you think they're contributing to the problem more themselves?
I don't have much to say besides I think they're a dehumanizing disaster. Folks have to sleep somewhere. I mean, that's why the city of Boise lost the case effectively. No matter how you want to deal with this difficult issue, I think it's asinine to think that putting up spikes and providing uncomfortable spaces is A, an effective solution, and B, how we want to treat human beings, because all life is precious. And I don't know any recent research on this, perhaps you all do, but I don't know of any studies that show that those are actually effective in improving homelessness. It's just, what we often see in criminal justice is mean-spirited policy that looks good to people who want to be punitive, but actually does nothing to decrease crime. It just increases fear of crime.
Yeah, I completely agree with Sean on this. I think we've spent too much time, and this is almost to your question, David, of where are these discrepancies and where are the overlap? I think we do spend a ton of time having that thought, but then not investing in the solutions. So, and I feel that a lot from a lot of my liberal friends these days, which is we're spending a lot of time getting really upset with some actions, including us of the city of Boise, and pushing that court case and trying to get all the way to the Supreme Court. I should write back up. Maybe folks don't know that court case. So there's something called Martin versus Boise that's been going through the courts now for a number of years, which started when a couple of people experiencing homelessness sued for mistreatment. And basically it led to this question of, is it cruel and unusual punishment to punish someone for sleeping somewhere? And that went all the way through the Ninth Circuit, and ultimately they ruled that, yeah, the Eighth Amendment here had some jurisdiction. And so that was tried to get pushed to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court that said this year they were not going to hear the case. And so now it's still working its way through the lower courts to hopefully get settled. But it's kind of forced this question even more, and Boise now is kind of the conversation piece around the country around this, of what's the line? Because there is another side of it. The gentleman here mentioned Cooper Court. And I don't know if people had heard about that, but we had kind of Idaho's first large-scale encampment happened, and I was working at Catch. It was my backyard. I was out there every single day. And that would have been 2015, end of 2015. Terrible things happened there. The victimization, especially of women on the street, is astronomical. We did a survey just of our providers of coming through, and women specifically reported experiencing sexual domestic violence. 90% of them reported having that sexual domestic violence sometime during their experience of homelessness. So we don't want people on the street. So there's this balancing act, because we know encampments are terribly unhealthy. They're one of a huge public health crisis in terms of for the people that are actually living there. So what do we do in the meantime? And this has been, I'll admit, one of my frustration points of we're willing to have that thought of we shouldn't have encampments, and so enforcement maybe plays some tiny bit of role, but we shouldn't be ticketing people for sleeping. So in the complicated mess of all of this, there's only one thing we can do, and that's end homelessness. But yet if we're not putting resources towards it, then we don't get credit for being so angry at that. And I think right now there's too many people that are very proud about being loud about that, but then not necessarily advocating for the things that will ultimately help those who are on the street.
We're going to drop all the way down, ma'am, yes, black.
We have to talk about systems of oppression, because we can't just put resources at things without changing the system of oppression that continues to create not only people experiencing homelessness, but reperpetrates trauma on people for generations. And really, if we get back to that, we go back to slavery and redlining and go way, way back to be able to have these really honest conversations. So I think to my right, this young lady talked about language, but when do we have to start fundamentally shifting from bootstrap mentality to individual responsibility to really talking about the deeply rooted systems that have perpetuated this ever-increasing issues today? Sorry, Wyatt.
We should do that yesterday. I think it's like a how question, don't you think? Of we're all learning in classes like Sean's about the systemic oppression. So then the question is, what do we want to do on Martin Luther King Day? Like, what do we want to do to start tearing that down? And I just keep coming back, like, we have to collaborate and be louder, and I think to David's point, be willing to disagree in public with each other, which I think is uncomfortable. Like, the reality is this, in terms of like homeless services, and this is probably hard here. We don't need another shelter bed in Idaho. We don't need another one. What we need are housing beds. And so, like, even systemically looking at that, our shelters are doing, an amazing job to stem the crisis as it exists. But shelter is not home. So what can we do to make sure that we're not growing the wrong side of the bucket too much? And choices like that are happening, I think, every single month in terms of where we spend our dollars. Maybe at Christmas time, where we give, where we spend our volunteerism. And I don't mean to shame anyone, of course, but just are we educating ourselves enough to make individual decisions that lead to larger collaborations, which lead to systemic change? And I think that individual education, like, this is probably not a popular topic, at the dinner table or at the bar, but Maybe it should be. This is why I drink alone, I think, because no one wants to talk about it. Well, that's where I go back to. Like, are we educating ourselves to make some better choices? Like, can we get 10% better this year on our individual choices of where we volunteer, where we donate, and how we spend our time, so that we collaborate a little bit better, and then hopefully lead systemic. But I think we need to do it yesterday, and it's really tough to do.
I know this question wasn't for me, but if I could add one more thing to that. So I think what's also important is shifting your perspective of how you think about home and how you think about your place in your community. So I remember, growing up in Middleton, I thought of my place as this little farm plot. Here at the college, I saw the boundaries just going around the campus, and then beyond that, I didn't really care what was going on. But in American society, especially, we just have our own little private plot, and that's what we take care of. And beyond that, we don't really think about land, or, how that land maybe isn't, the land that we're on isn't just ours. It's part of a bigger community. And that's really why, homelessness is highlighting such an interesting aspect of American society, where we just think of home as the place where we are and not something bigger than that. So when I was working in Cambodia with indigenous communities, they see the boundaries of their land just outside of the community, and everything within that is shared. They share their agricultural land, the places where they eat, the places where they sleep even, and they don't have a single person who's homeless in those communities, because if somebody ended up their house burned down or something happened, the rest of the community would take them in. We don't do that here.
As you may have discerned, I've cleverly superimposed a map imaginary of the United States on the audience, and we've moved from the Atlantic seaboard, well represented, through the Midwest. The Northwest is power brokered by the president and two VPs up there in the corner. We'll keep an eye on them. And moving all the way down Southern California, poorly represented. So an opportunity here. Anyone in the lower front and center? Yes. If everyone could hear, the question has to do with universal income. I'm interpreting as a living
probably have the least
wage.
expertise on that, so I'll just say quickly, sounds great to me. We just need to close the tax loopholes that allow people like Amazon to not pay a damn penny at the end.
I think it's really complicated, and I'm not an economist, so I don't want to speak to it. I don't know what it would do to the economy and how it would change the cost of housing, if it would really help with that problem. The problem with what we're talking about, homelessness is a housing problem. It's that there aren't enough homes to go around. We need to build more affordable housing. And so I don't think universal basic income is the solution. I don't know what it would do, because I'm not an economist, but I think we gotta focus the conversation on housing and how can we increase what's available, what's out there.
And I'll just back that up by saying, well, I said everything Ali just said. I'm not an economist, but what I do know is the minimum wage in Idaho is $7.25 and has not been raised in over 10 years. It doesn't work. It isn't working. And so I don't know the rest, but I do know that that's not a livable wage, right? It's just not. Nowhere in the United States is anybody able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment off of minimum wage. That's not just Idaho. That is across our country. And I think as we sit here on Martin Luther King Day and think about that, I mean, he was getting ready to start the Poor People's March, right? He talked about universal income. I mean, still, so much of what he said is so still resonates today, for sure.
You have to work 73 hours a week in Ada County to afford a 1-bedroom apartment on minimum wage. 73 hours a week just to afford your 1-bedroom apartment right now.
What's that going to do to a kid?
I should add to, when I say sounds great, of course, $1,000 a month or whatever it is, we'd all love that. But for the folks I've been talking about, that's still not going to eradicate housing discrimination and employment discrimination. So there's still obviously lots of work to do there that facing is not going to.
I think what we'll do by request, although I certainly have found this pattern of questions and answers productive, I hope you have as well. We have a lot of folks in the audience who seem very interested in asking their special question, not picking on anybody in particular. And I'm wondering if we could enter into a bit of a lightning round in which we get through as many questions as we can with short answers from our panelists with an effort to really engage in a kind of rapid fire fashion. Let's start over here. Greg?
This kind of seems like a tidal wave to me in this area. I mean, 4 years ago, housing here, not, I mean, obviously, we're talking about people who are gainfully employed. Not that it wasn't a big deal to buy a house, but you could buy a house in Caldwell, a pretty decent house and now it's like, that's not even possible. And obviously, that's more of maybe a middle class sort of an issue, but it seems to me like, how much of this, from your standpoint, is just drinking from a fire hose that maybe wasn't really turned on as much 4 years ago? I don't know if I'm even close, but if that makes sense what I'm saying. It just seems like housing has gone up so much in this area that that's like a whole new problem on top of an existing.
So we've done some stats at the city of Boise around growth to try to figure out what are we even talking about here. And so our estimates show that we need to have, just the city of Boise needs to create 1,000 new living units every single year just to meet incoming demand. 1,000 new living units every single year, which is like for Boise's lifetime, like that's a lot of units. The reality is this: over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been building 1,300 units every single year. We've been meeting demand. This problem, though, unfortunately, I think it's just highlighted what has been true for a while. I do think that the growth has made it, and use this term, like a middle-class problem. Housing instability has been true in the valley for a long time. We are 7,000 units short of meeting the demand for those who are earning 30% or less of the area median income. Those are extremely low income. We haven't had enough houses for them ever. But it's just now that someone who is more in that workforce, maybe who's a teacher, someone who's a firefighter, now they too are rent burdened or burdened by their mortgage. So I think housing instability has always been there. It's not just the last 4 or 5 years. I just think now it's also become a middle class problem. And I think that's where it gets back to our responsibility. So this has always been an issue for especially people of color, people not of U.S. nationality. This has always been a problem for people low income, but now it's become a community-wide problem. What do we want to do about that? It's like we finally, I think, just woke up to something that was always true. So now the responsibility, I think, to take some pretty bold actions to solve something we should have solved a long time ago.
Yeah, please.
So we need to preserve the affordable housing that's already here. We have a problem right now in the community with a lot of property ownership transfers, and so people, particularly out-of-state investors, are coming in, purchasing, big apartment complexes that were traditionally affordable, and then, flipping them and doing some mass evictions, and we're seeing that at my organization. So preserving that and creating more regulations around property ownership transfers and how that works. And then incentivizing building more affordable housing. A housing land trust is a really great solution because that means the government, owns the land and they can control kind of who builds what. And then kind of deregulating some building permit and planning and zoning and all that stuff when people do build affordable housing. So it's more attractive to them financially to build.
Samela, and then we'll move to the center again. You're next.
So my question is kind of around the rhetoric. You guys have talked a lot about affordable housing, the fact that we need it. And I work closely with business owners. I talk to a lot of business owners here in Caldwell who use the terms, we don't want affordable housing here because we don't want to be the Valley's affordable housing community. We don't want those kinds of houses. How do we kind of change that conversation with people in a direction that actually gets us housing and affordability and, help them realize that this is actually a much wider problem than just my business?
I don't know that I have a solid answer for it. I think it is just a much larger discussion that we have to have with people in our communities. I know, and I'm still relatively new to Idaho, and but I was reading some things this morning, and I know there was some affordable housing units that were developers that were brought to, I think, our city mayor, city council. This is several years ago, and at those meetings, lots of the neighborhood came and said, we don't want that here. So I think we've just got to start having those tough conversations, and there's such an educational piece to solving some of the housing issues too. It is, I believe in everything everybody on the panel is saying as far as dollars and things, but it is so multifaceted is the approach that we have to take, because and even in Missouri, same thing all the time. We don't want a shelter. We don't want more programs because then if you build it, they will come, sort of thing. Where we were always like, but these are folks that are part of our community and have been part of our community for generations. These aren't people just moving in or doing all of those things. And even if they are, don't they have a place in our community? So I know that's a dreamy answer, but it is just part of what has to happen is we've got to communicate to those folks. Because lots of times, if folks that think that way, they have power. They vote. And so it matters,
Ma'am.
I'm an advocate coordinator for the 3rd Judicial District Guardian Life program, and I represent children in foster care. The greatest impediment right now to returning children home to their parents is addiction recovery, no good recovery services, and housing, a lack of stability for housing. I guess we live in a conservative area, and people want to be fiscally conservative, and I want to be a bleeding heart liberal, but I still want to be fiscally conservative. But what I've observed is that it's always cheaper to take care of people on the front end than to pay for the services on the back end. So I really would like to see more quantification. Right now in the 3rd District, we have 750 children in foster care. That's in the Canyon County area. That's more than the Ada County District has. And there's a real price to keeping children in foster care. When children are in state care, your tax dollars pay for every single need they have. And so I guess I'd like to see the dialogue flipped to the fiscal conservatism of taking care of people on the front end. When you say it costs $55,000 a year for a homeless person to be on the street, that means something to me. That means something to my conservative Republican mother. And you have to explain it. Like, how can that be? Those are hard dollar costs. Those aren't made up foo-foo numbers. Those are hard dollar costs. And I think all of these things, the lack of proper residential treatment that's accessible for people who don't have incomes, those things all have hard dollar costs associated. But who's the keeper of the numbers for those things, I guess? How do we get those numbers to make, and I'm so sad there are no representatives here today from city council or state legislature, because I think they, above everyone, need to be involved in these discussions. But who are the keepers of those numbers?
So, I think so many people, and that's part of the problem. For instance, tomorrow, one of my meetings, and don't worry, you can fall asleep during this sentence, is to have a data stakeholder meeting with a number of different institutional partners that have numbers, like our hospital systems, like the criminal justice system, like us as a city government. But the hope here and the power is if we get to flip the script on those numbers, we get to do cool things. So that number of 55,000, 53,000 that we got from a study that the city of Boise commissioned. That wasn't just done randomly. We asked for that information, not just so we could win in trivia that night. That was so that we could make an action, and that led to the creation of what's called New Path Community Housing. I don't know if the College of Idaho lets people come visit Boise or not, probably, but at 23rd and Fairview in Boise, if you're ever driving by, there's a new apartment complex there. It's called New Path, and it's the first building in Idaho's history dedicated to ending homelessness. So the 40 units there are specifically targeted to our most vulnerable. And we know they're our most vulnerable because we asked for the data. So that data was prioritized from all of our emergency systems. So the ER and our hospital partners, the paramedics who are on the street, the police, our shelter providers, and the criminal justice system helped us decide who needs this the most. And so addiction recovery was huge, but we put it on site. It's not just a referral, and sometimes referrals, unfortunately, are just a prayer. It was on-site services, and we're now 13 months into it, and 87% of people are still stably housed. These are the people that are carrying the stigma that we're all talking about here, the people that are, I would argue, judged the most. And it's working. And it happened because we had this data and could go to these providers and say, hey, hospital systems, you know what's probably cheaper to do? For you to give us $100,000 every single year to give this services team right here, so we can help keep them out of the ER. Same thing with Ada County. You know, it costs $95 a day, is that right? $95 a day in jail, roughly?
I'm not sure. Sorry.
Let's assume I'm right. And I'm not the keeper of that number. And so we had to go to Ada County and say, hey, you should put in $300,000 for these services because, again, we're going to keep people out of prison. And so the data is power, and I think it sounds like we're aligned on that. And so we need the data is everywhere, but so literally it could be any one of you and should be any one of you. Bring that data together and go and sit down with your city council, go sit down with your mayor, go sit down with your state legislator, and say, hey, here's what I've looked at. How do you read this differently?
As we're coming close to the end of our time, it's clear that we won't have enough time to get to every question. So I have a thought on the fly. I'm going to invite our panelists to each take no more than a minute, 60 seconds, to summarize what they'd like to say as takeaway. But prior to that, let's move through the audience and ask each of you to do your best to give a quick articulation of your question or your observation back to back. So let's hear from the audience first, as many of you wish to speak. If we can get through all of you, great. If we cannot, I'll cut you off after about half a dozen, and then we'll move to our panelists and give them a parting shot, an opportunity for each of them to give us some closing thoughts to take away with us. We'll move left to right, my left to my right, across the room. I'll start with our student body president. Indeed.
I'll talk about the legislation. So there's an organization called the IAA that has tried to present some expedited eviction legislation last year, and they're probably going to try to do that again this year. So definitely don't support that. That basically makes it a lot easier for landlords and property managers to evict people, which in this state is already very easy. Other states have a lot more rules around why you can evict someone. And there's more of a notice requirement. Here it's 3 days. So essentially you don't pay your rent and then you've got 3 days to kind of figure out what to do before you go to court. I have been working with Melissa Intro, and I know Ilana Rubel is working on some legislation as well, proposing some counter legislation, which will increase requirements around what has to be in leases, how property ownership transfers works, and late fees, some other stuff like that. So that's what to look out for.
Nicely done.
Mr. President, I would say in terms of the action, don't wait in line. And I feel like this generation understands that better than probably any generation in our country's history. Don't wait in line. I do think in Canyon County especially, we have a dearth of collaboration. And so I'm old-fashioned this way. There's a lot of good research. You're not starting from zero if we wanted to really make an impact at the College of Idaho. There's a lot of great research. And so in terms of what to do next, it's actually, to be honest, not that much up to debate in terms of the actual, some of the programmatic work. What to do next in terms of the people side and moving people and building collaborations, that's the hard part. We actually have in our audience 2 of our better collaborators in the Valley. So if you've never heard of Healthy Impact Nampa, talk to this woman right here. Raise your hand. and learn about that. And if you want to learn about all the work that's happening around refugees in the Valley, Christina here in the front is doing amazing work around collaboration. These two are badasses because of the time they spend with others to move them, to talk about stigma, to build programs. And so that's just what it takes. You just have to wake up one day and say, I'm not going to wait in line anymore. And so there's no reason the College of Idaho can't be the driving force around the next great homelessness collaboration in Canyon County.
Wow. So I guess after our conversation, or as we wrap up this conversation, I think find a piece to the housing issue that you can work on, whether that's trying to find the data, because you're right, we need for people to understand the fiscal cost, and we can find common ground. We can both decide we want everybody to have housing. We can find ways to do that. I think to Jean's point, we've got to continue to have these tough conversations about dismantling and chipping away at the systemic oppression while we do something tangible on site at the time. So I think it's all these different approaches, but just do something. Just do something. Find something that one of us said today and do something. I think build relationships with people. It has been life-changing for me to work with the folks that I've worked with. Life-changing. Absolutely, it is a privilege to walk alongside the people that I walked alongside. And we need more treatment, absolutely. We need more time. A month and a half in treatment anymore, I never hear of anybody getting that anymore. That's huge, but we need to be better, and we can be better. And I think all of this, it's about moving away from civil rights to a larger discussion of human rights. Right? That's different, and it's bigger, and so we have to start thinking about humanity and human rights versus civil. Civil rights are important, but how do we really uphold human rights? So that's more my challenge for sure, especially on a day like today, right? What did Martin Luther King talked about an injustice here? It was his letter from Birmingham jail, where he's thinking about injustice here and injustice somewhere else. We're all intertwined in it together, and so we have to be active and do something.
There's so much to address. The first thing I'll say is, if you do something, I'll give you 3 credit hours for it. Come do an internship, come do an independent study. I mean, we can do that in the Department of Anthropology and Sociology and elsewhere. I've supervised numerous guardians ad litem, people who've worked for the prisons, and it's changed their lives, I'm proud to say. Some of my old students are working in the system trying to dismantle this stuff now. So, if you want to do that, I guess come talk to me or Scott Draper, who's here. We can help you out with that. The treatment piece is a disaster, a concept that's getting a lot of press. A good friend of mine, Ruben Miller, has been writing about the notion of carceral citizenship, which TLDR is it sucks in almost every way to be justice involved, except people who are justice involved, because of the way we've set things up, actually have more access to substance abuse treatment than many other folks in the population. Now that's messed up, but that is how it is. When I see folks get more than 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever of substance abuse treatment, it's usually because I've had to arrest them and send them to prison for 6 months. That was the best thing that I, as a parole officer, had to offer to them. And if there's anything that's symptomatic of a broken system, I think that's it, right? Continuing to push for legislation. I mean, it's great to be a penal abolitionist and to, advocate. That's the thing I hear a lot on campus, just tear down the whole system. That's cool. But also, fight for legislation now. You can be a reformist and a revolutionary. Being a reformist doesn't have to carry all this stigma like you're being a bad revolutionary. You can do both. Dismantle and seek more just and equitable policy to help these folks now, today, with real allocation of dollars. And the numbers are important. I don't know, I think it is $95 actually from the article that just came out, but jail was a major provider of housing for folks, what's the new term, transitioning between houses? Sorry, my language is outdated on this. Wait, you're not supposed to say homeless. What are we supposed to say? Housing stable, yeah. Right? So, now we know that there's this contest between the Department of Correction and Ada County Sheriff because we have a severe lack of jail space. So it's cheaper to house someone in a prison than it is to house them in a jail. Where do you think that leaves officers? Where do you think that leaves folks dealing with justice-involved individuals? If anyone has studied justice reinvestment, then you know that it's been a titanic policy failure. We actually have increased our incarceration, and we have shown ourselves to be a more punitive state after trying to implement criminal justice reform. So we should gather the numbers on that and study the expense that it means for taxpayers, even if you don't care about people. If all you're worried about is the money, well, the money piece is just as troubling as the human rights piece, because we continue to throw money at a problem with solutions that are ineffective, and incarceration is not an effective policy to deal with homelessness. Okay, that's it.
A warm welcome to each of our panelists. And our deepest welcome to the campus. We hope if you're a visitor, you have a chance to look around, stay as long as you wish, and thank you so much for attending this panel. We hope to see you at a Dean's Forum in the near future. Good afternoon.